It was 2:03 in the morning when the thunder cracked hard enough to shake the windows. I'd been half asleep on the couch, the TV still glowing blue in the dark, when someone pounded on my front door. At first I thought it was just the storm, branches hitting the porch again. Then I heard it. My mother's voice, weak, trembling. "Grayson? Please open the door." My heart stopped. I hadn't heard her voice in nearly a year. When I swung the door open, the wind almost ripped it from my hand. She was standing there in the downpour, soaked through, shivering, hair clinging to her face. Her clothes were torn from the rain, not from harm, but from the long walk through the storm. Her lips were pale and her eyes, God, those eyes looked like someone who had finally reached the end of her strength. "Mom," I whispered, barely recognizing her. She smiled faintly. One of those smiles meant, to stop you from worrying even when everything inside you is breaking. And then her knees gave out. I caught her just before she hit the floor. Her skin was cold, her heartbeat faint but steady. I carried her inside, wrapped her in a blanket, and placed her on the couch, the same couch, where I'd fallen asleep a few hours earlier, thinking my life was finally peaceful. My name is Grayson Hale, 32 years old, and this house was supposed to be my fresh start. I'd built a quiet life here in Maplewood, a small town where people waved at each other from across the street and asked how your day was like they truly cared. I worked as an EMT, someone people called when things went wrong. Funny how easy it was to fix strangers' emergencies but never your own families. I glanced around my living room, the framed photos of my wife Nora and our son Eli, the toy fire truck left on the rug, the smell of cinnamon coffee that had gone cold. Everything in this house was built on peace, routine, kindness, predictability. And yet in that moment, peace felt like a story I'd told myself just to feel normal. When Mom opened her eyes again, she looked smaller than I remembered. "Grayson," she whispered, her voice raspy but soft. I didn't know where else to go. Her words broke something in me. "You're safe here," I said, tightening the blanket around her shoulders. "You hear me? You're safe." She nodded slowly, eyes glistening in the dim light. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The storm outside grew louder, wind howling against the glass, lightning turning the room white for seconds at a time. And then she said something that changed everything. "I left because I couldn't pretend anymore." My chest tightened. Pretend about what? Her eyes flickered toward the window, as if afraid someone might be listening. "About your father, Grayson. About what he's done, and what he's planning to do next." The room went still. Even the storm seemed to pause, holding its breath. That was the night my world cracked open, not from thunder, but from truth. The storm didn't stop that night. It just grew heavier, drumming on the roof like the sky itself was running out of patience. I sat beside Mom with a mug of tea between my hands, watching the steam rise and curl in the lamplight. She hadn't said another word since that sentence. "About your father, Grayson. About what he's done." Her fingers trembled as she held the blanket tighter around her shoulders. Every now and then, her eyes drifted toward the window, following the flash of lightning like she was expecting someone to appear outside. Finally, she whispered, "I know I should have come sooner." I swallowed hard. "You don't have to explain anything tonight." But she shook her head. "No, I do. You've spent your whole life believing your father was something he's not, and I can't carry that lie anymore." The clock on the wall ticked louder than usual. Each second felt like it stretched into forever. I remembered that sound from childhood. The same ticking echoing in the hallway of our old house. Back then, I'd lie awake listening to it, counting the seconds until the morning light came through the window. That house felt a lifetime away now. But as Mom spoke, I could feel the walls of that memory closing in again. "When your father retired last year," she said carefully, "he didn't just leave the company. He left unfinished business, promises he shouldn't have made, people he shouldn't have trusted. And when it started catching up to him, he wanted me to help him hide it." I frowned. "Hide what?" She hesitated. "Money that wasn't ours, names on papers that shouldn't exist. He said it was harmless, that it would all fix itself if we stayed quiet. But then something changed. He became someone else. Obsessed, angry, convinced that people were out to ruin him." I rubbed my temples, trying to process. My father had always been strict, ambitious, proud, but secretive. Paranoid? It didn't fit. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" I asked quietly. Mom looked down at her hands. "Because I thought I could fix it. Like I always tried to fix everything." A flash of lightning lit the room again. followed by a low roll of thunder that rattled the window panes. She stared at the floor, eyes unfocused. When he started talking about taking everything out of the bank, about moving it before they come for it, I realized he was in deeper than I ever imagined. I told him to stop, to come clean. And that's when he... She stopped herself, lips trembling, and shook her head. I reached out, resting a hand gently on her shoulder. Hey, you're safe here, Mom. You don't have to relive it tonight. Tears welled in her eyes, but she nodded. I just needed you to know what kind of storm you might be walking into. I leaned back, trying to steady my breathing. The man I'd grown up with, proud, polished, untouchable, had always been a mystery wrapped in rules. Now that image was unraveling, and as much as I wanted to stay angry for all the distance he'd created between us, I couldn't help but feel something else creeping in, fear. If what Mom said was true, this wasn't just a family issue. It was something that could destroy reputations, maybe even lives. Outside, the storm eased into a soft drizzle. Eli's nightlight flickered through the hallway, painting a warm orange glow on the walls. Nora stood there quietly, watching us from the kitchen doorway. She hadn't said a word since she helped dry Mom's hair and bring her warm clothes. She finally broke the silence. Gray, I called Dr. Lynn. She said she can come by in the morning to check your mom, just to make sure she's okay. I nodded, grateful for how easily Nora could turn chaos into calm. But behind her steady voice, I caught the question she wasn't asking out loud. What exactly is happening? I'll explain tomorrow, I said softly. She gave me a small nod. Okay, just promise me one thing. What's that? Don't let this drag you back into whatever you've been trying to leave behind. I wanted to promise, but part of me already knew that wasn't going to be possible. When everyone finally fell asleep, I sat by the window, listening to the soft hiss of rain on the driveway. Mom's words replayed over and over. He's planning something. I pulled out my old work laptop from the cabinet. It had been months since I'd used it, since I'd stopped working the emergency response desk downtown. I opened it, logged in, and searched the public records database. Then I typed in my father's name. Harold Hale. The screen loaded slowly, the progress bar dragging across, and when the results appeared, my stomach dropped. There were 6 new property filings under his name in the last 2 months. Each one registered to different small companies, all at the same address on the outskirts of town. The address I recognized immediately, because it was the same warehouse where I'd worked my very first EMT shift years ago, a place long abandoned since the fire. I stared at the screen, the rain light flickering on my face. Something told me that the storm outside wasn't over. It had only just moved indoors. The rain stopped sometime before dawn. The air smelled like wet pavement and pine, the kind of morning where everything felt washed, but not quite clean. I hadn't slept. I sat at the kitchen table with the laptop open, the cursor blinking beside my father's name, Harold Hale. 6 property filings, all tied to fake companies, all circling back to one forgotten place, the old warehouse on Hollow Creek Road. That name alone brought back the scent of smoke, the flash of red lights, and the hollow sound of sirens echoing in an empty district. I hadn't been back there since that night. The fire that almost took 2 lives and ended my first year as an EMT in chaos. Now somehow my father was connected to it. Mom was still asleep on the couch when I stepped out. Nora met me by the front door, hair tied up, wearing my old hoodie. She looked at me like she already knew what I was about to say. You're going to find him, aren't you? She asked. I shook my head. Not find him, just understand. Gray? I won't cause trouble. Nora, I just need answers before this turns into something none of us can undo. Her eyes softened. Then at least promise me you'll call if anything feels wrong. I will. She handed me her thermos of coffee. Then take this. You think better with caffeine than with fear? That was Nora. She never stopped me. She just tried to steady me. The road to Hollow Creek was quiet that morning. The town hadn't changed much. The same old diner with the flickering neon sign. The same field where kids played baseball every summer. But as I turned down the long cracked road toward the industrial side, everything grew still. The warehouse sat half hidden by overgrown weeds and rusted gates. Faded paint clung to its walls, and the condemned notice still flapped weakly in the breeze. If you didn't know better, you'd think it had been forgotten by time itself. But someone hadn't forgotten it. The padlock on the gate was new, shiny, and on the gravel outside there were fresh tire tracks, faint but visible. I parked a little farther down, under the shade of a maple tree, and walked the rest of the way. The morning light was pale and thin, cutting across the roof like a knife through fog. Every sound, the crunch of my shoes on gravel, the hum of distant traffic felt louder in that silence. I reached the gate, ran a hand along the cold metal, and noticed something odd. The lock wasn't fully closed. It was hooked but not latched, like someone wanted it to look secure, without actually being locked. I pushed it gently and it swung open with a low groan. Inside, the air smelled faintly of oil and damp wood. Dust hung in beams of sunlight that leaked through the broken roof panels. I expected emptiness, just old crates and ash from years ago. But near the far wall there was a new table. Clean, metal, out of place, and on it, a folder. I hesitated for a second before stepping closer. The folder was thick, marked with a black ink label, Creek Holdings, Legal Transfers. My heartbeat slowed as I opened it. Inside were documents, copies of deeds, contracts, signatures, all identical to the ones I'd seen in the digital filings last night. And at the bottom of each page, my father's name, written in his familiar sharp handwriting. Except one. One page was different. The signature was forged. I knew it instantly. The curve of the H was wrong, the spacing uneven. And under it, a second name appeared. The ink was smudged but legible enough. Elaine Moore. My stomach tightened. That was my mother's maiden name. Why would she be on any of these papers? Why would he use her name for whatever this was? I took a shaky breath, flipping to the last page. There was a date stamped at the bottom corner, last week. That meant someone was still actively using this place. Before I could process it further, I heard it, the faint creak of the main door shifting. I froze, holding my breath. A gust of cold air swept through, stirring dust from the floor. I turned toward the sound, half expecting to see a shadow, a figure, something. But there was no one. Just the door, slightly ajar, swaying with the wind. Still, a strange unease settled in my chest, because when I looked back at the table, the folder was gone. I blinked, confused. My fingers were still dusty from flipping its pages. I hadn't moved. Hadn't looked away long enough for anyone to come in unnoticed. But the folder that was right in front of me seconds ago had vanished. My pulse pounded as I scanned the empty space again. Corners, shadows behind the crates, nothing. Only one thing remained on the table now, a single sheet of paper folded once. I reached for it slowly and unfolded it. In the center, written in the same sharp handwriting as my father's. Stop looking, Grayson. It's not yours to fix. The words blurred for a second as I exhaled shakily. He knew I'd come. He expected me to. And that message wasn't a warning. It was a challenge. I stepped back into the sunlight, my reflection flashing across the car window. I didn't recognize the look in my own eyes anymore. Not fear, not anger. Something deeper. The truth had just changed shape and it was coming closer. By the time I drove back into town, the sun had dipped low behind the ridge. Everything was bathed in the faint amber light of evening, that quiet hour when day doesn't want to leave and night isn't ready to begin. The message in my pocket felt heavier than anything I'd ever carried. Stop looking, Grayson. It's not yours to fix. I'd read those words a dozen times already, and each time they sounded less like a warning and more like a secret whispered through clenched teeth. When I reached home, the porch light was already on. Through the front window, I saw Mom sitting upright now, wrapped in one of Nora's blankets, sipping tea. Nora was beside her, gently rubbing her shoulders, her expression caught somewhere between concern and quiet strength. As soon as I opened the door, Mom looked up. There was relief in her eyes, but also something else. Guilt, maybe. Grayson, she said softly, her voice fragile but steady. Where were you? I hesitated. I just needed some air. She nodded slowly, but I could tell she didn't believe it. Mothers always know when you're lying, especially the ones who've had to lie themselves for too long. After dinner, when Nora took Grace upstairs to put her to bed, Mom called me over to the couch. She stared at the mug in her hands, tracing the rim with her thumb. Your father came by 2 nights ago, she said finally. He wasn't supposed to. I froze. 2 nights ago here? Yes. Her gaze drifted toward the window, as if replaying it. He said he needed some old papers from the house. Something about property transfers. I didn't understand, but there was something in his eyes, Grayson. Something I hadn't seen in years. Not anger, fear. Fear? She nodded. He asked if I still kept the old family files from the bank. I told him they were gone. He didn't argue. He just said, "Tell him not to follow." Then he left. The words hit harder than I expected. Tell him not to follow. So my father knew I'd start looking. He knew the exact moment I'd begin piecing things together. Mom must have seen the realization flicker across my face because she reached out, touching my hand gently. "Grayson," she whispered, "I know you want to fix this. You always have, ever since you were little. But some truths, they don't heal when you drag them into the light. They just change what's left of you." Her words lingered like smoke. I wanted to argue, to tell her that the truth was the only way forward. But looking at her, I saw years of quiet endurance, of trying to protect a family that had already fractured too deeply. So I said nothing. Later that night, after everyone was asleep, I sat outside on the porch steps with my phone in hand. The sky above was clear now. Thousands of stars stretched across the dark like scattered glass. I scrolled through my contacts until I found a name I hadn't called in years. Elliot Mason. He'd been my partner back when I worked on the emergency response team. The kind of friend who noticed things others missed. If anyone could help trace the documents without raising alarms, it was him. I hesitated, thumb hovering over the call button. But before I could press it, my phone lit up on its own. "Unknown number, incoming call." I frowned and answered. "Hello?" There was silence at first. Then a voice, low, calm, deliberate. "Grayson Hale." My throat went dry. "Who is this?" "You're searching in places you shouldn't." The same phrase, the same rhythm as the note. I stood up, heart pounding but steady. "What do you want?" "Nothing. Just to remind you that your father's mistakes aren't yours to fix. If you keep digging, you'll turn his burden into your curse." The line clicked dead. I stood there, staring at the quiet street. The night breeze brushed against my face, cool but sharp, like the whisper of something unfinished. Whoever that was, they knew my name. They knew about the warehouse. And more than anything, they knew I wouldn't stop. Because maybe it wasn't mine to fix, but it was mine to understand. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and looked toward the horizon. Somewhere beyond the stillness of town, a truth was waiting, one that had tied itself to my family long before I was old enough to see it. And now it was unraveling. The next morning I woke to the soft golden light spilling across the living room. Mom was still asleep on the couch, tucked under a blanket. And the house smelled faintly of cinnamon from the leftover coffee Nora had brewed. I couldn't stop thinking about the call from last night. The voice, calm yet deliberate, had left me with a sense of foreboding I couldn't shake. I needed answers. After breakfast, I decided to return to the warehouse. I drove slowly down Hollow Creek Road, the tires crunching on gravel. The warehouse sat in silence now, the morning sun glinting off the old metal roof. The padlock from yesterday hung open, swinging gently in the breeze as if inviting me back. Inside, the dust had settled over the floor. But I noticed a faint outline where the folder had been. I followed it carefully to the far corner where a large, fireproof box was tucked behind old crates. My pulse quickened. I hadn't noticed this box yesterday. Someone wanted it hidden, but not too well. The box was locked, but not impossible to open. I retrieved my tools from the car. Small, precise, professional. 10 minutes later, the lid gave way with a faint click. Inside, everything was organized. Stacks of documents, neatly labeled in white envelopes. Contracts, deeds, transfer forms, all referencing companies I'd never heard of. And at the top, a single leather-bound ledger. I opened it slowly. The ledger was filled with handwriting I recognized instantly. My father's. But it wasn't just signatures. It was detailed notes, instructions, careful records. Every line spoke of decisions, promises, and hidden plans. And tucked between the pages, I found something else. A small stack of letters addressed to my mother. I read the first one. "Grayson, if you are reading this, know that I only wanted to protect you from what I feared would destroy the family. There are things I did not tell you because I thought it was safer to keep them hidden. But some truths cannot stay buried. H." I froze. This was my father, speaking to both of us at once. A confession, a warning, and a guidance all in one. The next envelope contained a map, not a street map, but a diagram of the warehouse and surrounding properties. Boxes, hidden compartments, secure filing cabinets, even old safety deposit keys. It was meticulous. It was deliberate. And it meant that my father had planned for someone to find this eventually. The realization hit me. This was never about punishment. It was about preparation. He had known I would uncover it, had left breadcrumbs, and had trusted me to interpret them correctly. I sat back, breathing slowly, letting it all sink in. Mom had carried so much alone, trying to protect me and herself from a man whose ambitions had once overshadowed everything else. And now she had handed me the key to understand it all. I looked out the broken windows at the soft morning light, and for the first time since last night, I felt a small sense of control return. I wasn't powerless anymore. I wasn't walking blindly into a storm. I had a ledger. I had instructions. And I had my choices. I carefully packed the ledger into my backpack, making sure the letters stayed dry. As I stepped outside, I felt the weight of responsibility, but also a strange relief. This was no longer just my father's secret. It was my family's future, and I was the one holding the pieces together. I returned home, placing the ledger on the kitchen table. Mom noticed it immediately, her eyes widening as she recognized the familiar handwriting. "You found it," she whispered, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and hope. "Yes," I said softly. "And now, we understand." For the first time in years, we sat in quiet together, listening to the gentle hum of the town outside. No storm, no pounding rain, just the calm after the first wave of revelations. And yet, even in that calm, I knew this was only the beginning. The ledger had shown me the path, but the questions remained. Who else knew? Who else could influence what came next? And what did my father truly hope to protect all these years? The morning sun streamed through the kitchen window, painting the ledger in golden light. I sat at the table, coffee in hand, staring at the neat rows of handwriting. Every line was deliberate, every note purposeful. Mom joined me slowly, carrying another mug of tea. She placed it beside mine without a word, and for a moment, we just looked at each other. No explanations, no questions, just presence. Finally, she spoke, her voice quiet but steady. "Grayson, there's more you need to see." I raised an eyebrow. "More?" She nodded, pulling a small envelope from her coat pocket. It was yellowed with age, the edges frayed, but the writing was unmistakable. E. Hale, her maiden initials. I carefully opened it. Inside were letters, some of them folded multiple times, written in a careful, elegant script. They weren't just letters. They were records of correspondence my mother had exchanged with my father over the years, letters I'd never known existed. Some spoke of mundane things, groceries, bills, birthdays, but others were different. They were warnings, hints, notes about decisions he was making, instructions to protect family interests, guidance on how to manage tricky situations without drawing attention. It was like reading a diary that spanned decades, a hidden layer of our lives, never spoken aloud, quietly shaping everything we'd experienced. One letter caught my attention immediately. It was addressed to me, dated the year I had graduated high school. "Grayson, I know you may not understand this now, but one day you will. Life isn't always about being right or being strong. Sometimes it's about seeing clearly, listening carefully, and choosing the path that protects those you love." E. Hale. I froze. My mother's words, carefully hidden for years, had been guiding me without me ever knowing. I spent the entire morning sifting through the envelopes. With each one, a picture of my parents emerged that I had never truly seen. They weren't perfect, and they had made mistakes, just like everyone else. But they had also been careful, deliberate, and protective in ways I hadn't realized. By the time Nora called me for lunch, I had the ledger and letters organized into neat piles. She examined them quietly, letting me explain what I'd found. "Gray, your mother kept all of this for a reason," she said finally, her hand on my shoulder. "I know," I replied. "She wanted me to understand without being overwhelmed. She wanted me to see the bigger picture." As the afternoon sun sank lower, I sat back and considered everything. The warehouse, the ledger, the letters, they were all part of a puzzle that had been slowly handed down to me. And the call last night, the warning, it wasn't a threat. It was another piece of the puzzle. Someone was watching, waiting, seeing if I would rise to the challenge. Someone who understood the stakes. I knew one thing for certain. I couldn't let fear decide my actions. The past had shaped me, yes, but it wouldn't control me. That evening, as the sky turned the soft blue of twilight, I took the ledger and letters to my study. I sat down, opening the first letter addressed to me. There was a quiet determination in the words, a sense that my parents had been preparing me for this moment all along. Somewhere in the background, Mom was humming a soft tune in the kitchen. Nora had lit a candle in the living room, the flame steady and bright. I realized then that understanding the past wasn't just about discovering secrets. It was about using what I knew to protect the future, my family, our home, and the life we were building together. and that realization filled me with a quiet resolve. The storm had passed, but the journey was far from over. Some truths were still hidden, some challenges still waiting, and I was ready to face them, not with anger or fear, but with clarity and purpose. The first light of dawn crept through the curtains, painting the room in soft, warm gold. I sat at the kitchen table, the ledger open before me, the letters neatly stacked beside it. For the first time since this storm began, everything felt still. Not empty, not quiet, but ready. Mom was already up, quietly making breakfast. The aroma of toast and coffee filled the house, comforting and grounding. She glanced at me and smiled, tired but relieved. "Did you sleep at all?" I shook my head. "Not really." But I didn't feel exhausted. I felt clear, focused. Over the past days, I had pieced together my father's carefully hidden plans, my mother's courageous protection, and the unseen guidance that had been quietly handed down to me for years. I had learned that the truth wasn't always easy to face, but when met with patience and understanding, it could be a tool for healing rather than destruction. I realized that the people I loved most, Mom, Nora, Grace, weren't just my anchor. They were my compass, and for the first time, I could see a path forward that included all of us. I spent the morning contacting key people, old associates of my father, lawyers and family friends, clarifying everything in the ledger. Every step I took was measured, deliberate, no anger, no rush, only understanding, care, and responsibility. By midday, the last of the tangled paperwork was settled. The warehouse on Hollow Creek Road was secured. The letters and ledger returned to my mother for safekeeping, and finally a deep sense of calm settled over the house. Mom and I stood together in the living room, sunlight streaming through the windows. She reached out, holding my hands in hers. "You did the right thing, Grayson," she said, voice steady but soft. "You protected what needed protecting, without losing yourself in the process." I smiled, feeling the weight of months of confusion. Fear and unanswered questions lift slightly. "I just followed the breadcrumbs," I said, "and learned that family isn't just blood. It's trust, love, and knowing when to let go." Mom's eyes shimmered, proud and relieved. For the first time in years, I saw her at peace. As the afternoon sun grew stronger, Nora returned home from a quick trip into town. Grace ran to me, laughing and full of energy, oblivious to the shadows that had hung over our lives for so long. I scooped her up, holding her close, and for the first time in a long time, I felt the future stretching ahead of me, bright, full, and unbroken. The storm had passed. The secrets were out. The ledger and letters told a story not of shame, but of courage, foresight, and resilience. And I realized something that morning. The hardest battles aren't fought with fists or anger. They're fought with understanding, patience, and the quiet strength to do the right thing, even when it's difficult. I placed the ledger back on the shelf alongside the letters. They were no longer a burden. They were a guide, a testament to the family I loved and the lessons I had finally learned. I stepped outside, feeling the cool breeze on my face, the sun warming my shoulders. Some challenges would always come. Some storms would still rise, but now I knew I could face them, because the past no longer controlled me. I was ready for whatever came next, and for the first time in years, I smiled freely,